Welcome to our program. Hi there. I do hope you are improving your skills in business letter writing. I hope that everything is working out well for you there. Perhaps to help you along the way, if you are starting to stumble a little bit and you do need to have some ideas on certain aspects of writing, you might be able to gain some insights from this particular course that we're going to start right now. We're going to look at the technical side of writing skills, the things that will help you be a better writer. And perhaps from this particular program, you will be able to rectify or correct some of the mistakes that you are making in English writing. I do understand that for some of you it may be easier in writing English than it is for others. But there's always room to improve, and I will always encourage you as we work on this aspect of your writing skills together. Let's just take a look now. One of the good things about this particular subject is that there is the possibility that you will learn to improve. If you know what mistakes you're making, you really can learn to improve upon them. You shouldn't believe that people who say that being a writer is a natural ability and that you either have it or you don't. You shouldn't believe people who really say that. To a certain degree, that might be true. But you can learn to change your habits or correct your mistakes. You can learn that. We learn all sorts of things as we grow up. You are still not making, I'm sure, all the mistakes that you were making when you were 7 years old, for example. So this does go to show that you can learn. And even when you were at university or at school, you learn step by step to do things. And so there is a part of your ability, a part of your brain's function, actually, that is attached to learning these skills. Actually, it's right at the back part of your brain. That's where your brain learns these particular skills of correcting mistakes, technical kinds of errors, etc. So there is hope for you. Don't give up. It's just a matter of listening. It's just a matter of taking it all in and seeing how things work. So here we are talking about if you have to present technical reports or business reports, things that are factual and maybe analytical. We're not talking here about novels or writing essays or writing books or stories. Although indeed you can apply what you learn here to those sorts of writings as well. So you too can improve your writing. If you are aware of what the mistakes are that you're making, what the bad practices are that you are having in your writing skills, and how to avoid them. So let's take it one step at a time. The thing about writing is before you begin to write, you do need to write down what the objectives are of your report. This is absolutely critical. And unless you sit down and spend time doing this, then you're not really going to get anywhere at all. So let's bear in mind that you have to write reports. Nobody really likes to write reports. I've never met anybody who loves report writing. Have you? It's boring. It's a very difficult thing to do and it takes a lot of time. However, before you begin to write, you decide what your objective is of the report. This is a critical point. You can't avoid it. And if you don't sit down and work out your objective very, very clearly, then your report is not going to be very satisfactory. I can guarantee that. You will spend a lot of time putting information together, and unless you know the objective, you are going to be missing the point, and then you waste a lot of time. So do think about that point. Every report should have a single clear objective, and it needs to be very specific. It's the same as writing a letter. You need to know, as we have said in our letter sessions, what is the purpose of this letter? Why am I writing this letter? It's the same as making a telephone call. What is the purpose of the call? Why are you making the call? So think of the objective. Next up, in the process of things, it's important to write that down. In your report, it should be in one sentence, for example. The objective of this document is to help you write well-structured, easy-to-understand reports. So that is the objective of that particular example. And usually the objective is stated at the beginning of a report. If you can't write down the objective in one sentence, then really you're not ready to start to write anything. You need to define it. You need to bring it down to a simple one sentence that can clearly explain, without any ambiguity, what the objective of your report is. So this is very, very important. Another thing to think of when you're trying to work out your objective and your report and how it will be shaped is always have in mind a specific reader. You should assume actually that the reader who's going to receive your document, your report, is actually intelligent, but they may not be informed about all the things that you've got to share with them. But there is a level of intelligence there, so you do have to remember that you are writing to somebody who is expecting to be informed about something. It might be very important that you state upfront what the reader profile is. For example, you can say here, the target readers for this document are primarily students and researchers with a good working knowledge of English. This document is not suitable for children under 13, for example, or people who have yet to write documents in English. This example goes on to say it is ideal for people who have written technical or business documents and wish to improve their writing skills. So here you are keeping the specific reader in mind. If you know your target, if you know what their profile is, then you are able to gear or shape your details according to that particular reader. Next point, which is a very valuable one, is to decide what exact information you need to include in your report. You should really use the objective as your reference and list the areas you need to cover. It's just like writing out a list of requirements. And once you have researched and once you have collected all the information, then you would make a note of each main point. And after that, then you put them into some logical sequence or into logical groups. So this is like ticking off your checklist of the requirements you need to write a letter. The same applies here. What are the pieces of information that you need to put into your report? And as you've got them, tick them off. So all the things that you write in your report really have to contribute to the objective. If they don't, then maybe you don't need to include them. So you might find that you can use those pieces of information in a different report with a different objective. So it's not really wasted. Don't worry about that. So really decide what you need to include and how much depth that should be. And it also is very, very important that you have access to a good dictionary or a spell checker. Sometimes there are spell checkers in software programs. Of course, you would have one installed already. But if you don't, then use the old-fashioned dictionary. Oxford dictionaries Any of those can help you out here. So before you use a word that sounds good, but you're not sure of the meaning of it, you really do have to check it out. And that can be the same for any word you're not sure how to spell. You may know the meaning of it, but check out the spelling. It really does give the reader an indication of your level of command of English and your level of intelligence concerning English if you always show spelling mistakes in your reports. It means you've been a little bit sloppy. It means you haven't really focused on things. So the important thing is really to get into a dictionary, really have one at the side of your desk, on your table where you can easily access it. Do you know, if you have to get up and go and look for a dictionary, then the chances are that you're not going to do that because you don't want to waste time. So you'll find that you're sitting there and you will just guess it. And when you guess something, it may be incorrect. And therefore you've made mistakes. Next important thing about writing a report, and reports, by the way, can be quite lengthy. They really can cover a lot of ground, and sometimes you might get a little bit bamboozled, we say, by all of the content. So make sure you have someone who can provide feedback and do the reading and give you feedback at different stages of the report. You could identify a friend, perhaps, if that's possible, or in business orientation, you could look for a colleague who can read at least one draft of your report before you finally submit it in a formal way. So that's important. And in doing so, it doesn't matter if the person that is giving you the feedback isn't actually technically minded in that area. It doesn't really have to be that way if they don't understand the technical aspects. But what they can do is they can at least check structure and style. And from that, they may even force you to rewrite part of your report into plain English so that everybody can understand it. And that's what we're actually saying here. If things are found that they look better in plain English, then why not use it? You don't need to have very flowery words that are too sophisticated, that you don't really understand or use normally. The better report is written when it's more simplistic. So get somebody to give you feedback. That's a necessary part of the process. So once you have written your draft and you want to review it, then follow this checklist. Here we go with our checklist. You can ensure that the structure conforms to all the rules described in this document. All right, you can follow and make sure that everything conforms. You can run the document through a spell checker, and you can read it carefully, trying to put yourself in the shoes of your potential readers. So there are several things you can do before we move on to the main part of this session, which goes into the detailed parts of using plain English. That's what this session is mostly about, how to write the technical parts of English so that they are well understood and that you understand how to write and use all the different aspects of English as well. I'm sure that you are knowledgeable in the area of English language, but this program, as I said, will review some of those things and help you on your way to much better report writing and indeed much better letter writing. So we start off with using plain English. When you want to produce a report, you obviously need to get results. That goes without saying. All the hard work that you put into your report has to come out in some way, in a positive way, hopefully, with a positive outcome. you really do need to convince the reader that what you have to say is sensible, so that they can take action appropriately, so that they can implement certain things. If the report is a proposal, then you want the reader to accept your recommendations. That's true, isn't it? So therefore, you need to write that report in a way that they will accept those recommendations. If, for example, the report describes some research, then you want the reader to understand what you did and why it was important and valid. So you want the reader to come away with certain results and certain actions. Either they do something or they understand something. And when you do write reports, it's important not to be clever or cryptic in the way you write, because otherwise you will really confuse your readers and you will annoy them. This can have the opposite effect to what you wanted. It could be that you don't get your recommendations considered at all. So don't try to be clever when you're writing reports. And that's why the simple English approach is a much better approach to writing. In all cases, you are most likely to get results and good feedback and good comments if you present your ideas in a very simple way. That sounds all right, doesn't it? It doesn't need to be complicated. Writing doesn't really need to be complicated. If it does, then you should send it off to experts who can put in all those legal words that you might want, or all those technical words, depending on the kind of report it is. But generally, keep to this kind of rule. And if you stick to this rule, then you really won't go very wrong. Let's take a look at sentence and paragraph length. Now, it could be that you think it's clever to write long, complex sentences and that it looks much, much better in a report. Well, actually, that's not very true. It's simply quite wrong. Please get used to writing short and simple sentences, because you are writing for somebody to read this. And if something is way too long or way too complex, then chances are that that reader is really not going to stop and listen and spend the time to read your report. Many times, in many cases too, shorter sentences can be achieved if you stick to some simple principles. You might not be too sure how to write a short sentence. It may be your preference to ramble on and write long sentences because perhaps that's the way you speak, or that's the way you think. But it might pay for you to follow some principles in order to try to write some shorter sentences and simpler sentences. So let's take a look at this. A sentence should really only contain a single unit of information. That means try not to join too many compound sentences together. Look out for words like and or while, because these are often used unnecessarily to build compound sentences, and you find that you're writing 3 or 4 lines and it's only one sentence. So try to keep things rather brief and cut it down so you've got a single unit of information in the sentence. Another point that can help you, or another principle that can help you try to shorten your style of sentence writing, is to really check your sentence for faulty construction. That means just go through it and check for commas. Commas are a common cause of poor construction of sentences and for really long sentences. We will go into commas later on in this session in more detail, but just as we open and introduce this program to you, Start to think about these things already. Commas. How do you use them? If you use too many commas, you tend to add things on, so you end up with a very, very, very long sentence. So take a look at commas and how you use them as we continue with this. For example, let's read through this together. Time division multiplex systems are basically much simpler. The combination and separation of channels being affected by timing circuits rather than by filters, and inter-channel interference is less dependent on system non-linearities, due to the fact that only one channel is using the common communication medium at any instant. This is a bad example of sentence structure, and let's take a look now at a good example of how that message can be much better put. This is our good example. Systems multiplexed by time division are basically much simpler. Full stop. The channels are combined and separated by timing circuits, comma, not by filters. Stop. Interference between channels depends less on nonlinear features of the system, comma, because only one channel is using the common communication medium at any time. Stop. So do you see the difference? The second example is a good example. It's cutting the sentences down, making them shorter, and giving single units of information. This means that the information becomes very clear. It's not rambling, it's not ambiguous, it doesn't get confused. So here you find that the writing has improved and is much better than the bad example that we initially saw. So stop and learn how to break things down. Use some principles to shorten your sentences. And then you will take out also a lot of the excessive information that you may not really need to include. Point number C, in sentences and paragraphs, and the beginning of how to use English simply. Use parentheses sparingly. Sometimes we use them because we're in a habit of using them and we're putting our extra opinion into a parenthesis as a follow-on from what we've already stated. When that happens, we are doubling up and making our sentences really very, very long. And we don't want this to happen. So this can help us to shorten our sentences simply by not having to load our sentences with information contained in parentheses. Never use nested parentheses. That means series of parentheses if you want to retain your reader, because they are jumping back and forth. When they read, they're jumping from a sentence into parentheses with a long statement about something, then they're jumping back to a sentence, and this is really confusing. People just want you to say what you're going to say in a single unit of information. So don't clutter and don't unnecessarily make your sentences very busy by overloading them with parentheses. So just as it is bad to write long sentences, don't forget, it is also bad to write long paragraphs. A paragraph is just like a sentence in the way that it should contain a single, very understandable idea. And you should always keep paragraphs to less than half a page, most definitely. Some people would say that you need to keep them shorter than that a paragraph usually is about 6 lines maximum. So make sure that your paragraph does contain a single idea. That's the point of a paragraph. Also remember that successive paragraphs that are very short may also be difficult to read. So don't make your paragraphs too short, because You're just breaking lines and sentences up into and putting spaces in between them. So you do need to make sure that each paragraph contains an idea or a short group of ideas, a brief group of ideas. If you have too many paragraphs, then that also is not very easy to follow. And things also get broken up. And it's almost like reading in point form. So such an approach as this, where you've got lots of different paragraphs that are quite short and successive, is the result of poorly structured thinking. In the beginning, you have not thought out your ideas. You have not blocked them into Part A, Part B, Part C, Part D, or paragraph A, B, C, and D. If you need to write in a sequence of sentences that each express a different idea, then it's best to use bullet points or lists to do so, if you can't put enough in to make it a full paragraph of at least 6 lines or so. So paragraphs are there, just like a sentence, to give a single idea. And ensure that you don't ramble on and make them excessive. Ensure that your paragraphs as well are not too short, because they do break up the continuity and the theme and the flowing feeling of a letter or a report. We talked a moment about bullet points and enumerated lists, numbering 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So if the sentence in a paragraph or the sentences in a paragraph need to be written in sequence, then this suggests there's something that's related to them, that they are some form of list. And the idea that relates them should be used to introduce the list. For example, let's take a look at the following paragraph. It is a mess because the writer is trying to make what is clearly a list into one paragraph. And so there's a huge paragraph we are about to see, which is very hard to see any sense in it, as it is written as a full paragraph. So this is where your thinking comes into play. You do need to know what is contained in your paragraph. Is it a list or is it an idea? This is a mess. Let's read through it so you can get the idea of it. Getting to the client's new office on time for a 9 a.m. meeting involves following a number of steps. First of all, you have to set your alarm. You will need to do this before you go to bed the previous night. When the alarm goes off, you will need to get out of bed. You should take a shower next and then get yourself dressed. After getting dressed, you should have some breakfast. After breakfast, you have to walk to the tube station and then buy a ticket when you get there. Once you have your ticket, you can catch the next train to Central. When the train arrives at Central, you should get off and then finally walk to the office. Now that paragraph does contain a sequence of sentences that all relate to each other. And it's more or less an instruction of how to get somewhere. It's not really an idea. It's not really a concept. And it's quite tedious. Of course, the sentences have been put in short unit points in some respects, short sentences with single unit information. However, it's a mess and it's very hard to decipher. So let's take a look at how we can make it clearer. Much simpler and much clearer. To get to the client's new office on time for a 9 a.m. meeting. Number 1, set the alarm before going to bed the previous night. 2, get out of bed when the alarm goes off. 3, take a shower. 4, get dressed. 5, have some breakfast. 6, walk to the tube station. 7, buy a ticket. 8, catch the next train to Central. 9, get out at Central. and 10 walk to the client's office. So here we see the simple rule. If what you are describing is a list, then you should always display it as a list. Don't display lists in the body of a paragraph. It simply will get too messy and too complicated to read. And if there's important information in there, then it's going to be missed, because people are thinking it's an idea or a concept or an argument perhaps that you are trying to convey in your paragraph. And that's what you need to exactly convey in a paragraph. So that's a general rule to follow. It looks much better, doesn't it? And it's clearer, much, much clearer. So communication is therefore elevated. So the previous example is an enumerated list. This is where the items are shown in numbered order. If there is no specific meaning to the or specific ordering of the items in the list, then you really don't need to number them. In the list we just looked at, 2 follows 1 and 3 follows 2, etc. That's the sequence. But if there's no specific ordering in a list, then you would just use bullet points. So let's take a look at this particular example. Good software engineering is based on a number of key principles. One such principle is getting a good understanding of the customer requirements, possibly by prototyping. It is also important to deliver in regular increments, involving the customer or user as much as possible. Another principle is that it is necessary to do testing throughout, with unit testing being especially crucial. In addition to the previous principles, you need to be able to maintain good communication within the project team and also with the customer. So here we see a lot of information also put in the body of a paragraph, quite a long paragraph at that. So how might that look a little bit better? Let's take it to the next step. The paragraph is much better when it's rewritten and when bullet points are used. Let's start off and look at this example again. Good software engineering is based on the following key principles, and this is your opening statement. And then you put things into bullet point. Get a good understanding of the customer requirements, possibly by prototyping. Bullet point, the next one. Deliver in regular increments, involving the customer or user as much as possible. And the next bullet point. There's no particular order to this. These are statements that all interlink with each other. Do testing throughout. Unit testing is especially crucial. And last bullet point, maintain good communication within the project team. Brackets, and also with the customer. So here we can see that using bullet points and using numbers or enumerated lists can be very, very clear in putting together your report, putting together your information. You don't always have to write paragraphs. Paragraphs can be looked at in different ways, and quite obviously you must remember the reader. People want to read things clearly, and many people do request in reports that the format follows point form. You might hear that quite often. People will say, please put it in point form, that's the best way I can absorb information. Indeed, I do have colleagues in business who request that things are written in point form, of course with an introductory paragraph, but point form is the best way that those particular people can remember things and they can see things very, very clearly and in an instant. There are many, many examples throughout this session of bullet points and enumerated lists. And you should never be sparing in using lists, which means you should use them frequently. They are very, very valuable. They are very, very integral to making things clearly understood. And also just note that there is some punctuation that you must follow when you are actually writing your lists or forming your lists. So if all the list items are very short, and by this we normally mean less than 1 line long, they don't go down into the next line, then there is really no need for punctuation because it's quite short. It's just a quick statement. Otherwise, if you do go on to longer statements and it's longer than 1 line, use a full stop at the end of each list item. That's just a general rule that you can follow. And it's a good one to remember. So keeping lists short is actually very effective in report writing. They can be very powerful, and I suggest that you try to use them, not every single instance, but put them evenly paced throughout your report in different formats. You can use either numbering or bullet format, or you can use other kinds of icons apart from bullets as well on your software programs. Next up, in using plain English, in making sure that the body of a report is in plain English and that sentences, paragraphs, and bullet points, numbering is all taken care of and easy to read. Don't forget that you do need to look at using the simplest words and expressions possible. This is something that really will help you along the way to having a very good report, an excellent report, and handing that in to your superiors. Let's have a look at this example. On a recent trip to Brussels by Eurostar, the train manager made the following announcement. Do not hesitate to contact us in the event that you are in need of assistance at this time. What she meant was, please contact us if you need help now. But she clearly did not use the simplest words at all or expressions, did she? She said, do not hesitate to contact us in the event that you are in need of assistance at this time. So, while it may be acceptable verbally to say those things over the loudspeaker, and everybody does understand her point, it really is not acceptable in writing. In writing, it becomes very clear because we see it with the eye and we absorb it fully. Our eye looks for things that are uncluttered, and it looks for the simplest way to get a message. So the second point, or the second way of saying what she said, is much clearer and preferable. Please contact us if you need help now. So that's just an example. Use simple words and clear expressions when you are writing. So the golden rules are: replace difficult words and phrases with simpler alternatives. Really take a look at them and avoid stock phrases, standard stock phrases that really have no meaning. Avoid legal words and words that are too pompous, too superior, too above everyone else. Also, avoid jargon, and this is technical talk, using technical words in whatever field or industry you are in. If you avoid these stock phrases and legal words and jargon, then you are certainly going to make your document much easier to read. And people will end up actually enjoying your document much, much more. That's something you probably haven't thought about. People do actually have to enjoy what they are reading. So the simpler you make it, the more enjoyable it may be. Also, it is worthwhile noting that sometimes there's a lot of repetition in what we say. And sometimes we have words there that are quite unnecessary. Many sentences contain these unnecessary words. You find that if you read back through your writing that this may be happening from time to time. And this really does waste space, and also it blunts the message in a way. That means it doesn't keep the message clear and sharp. So the reader can get a little bit confused. And lots of the time, unnecessary words are caused by abstract words like nature, position, character, condition, and situation, as the following examples will show you. So let's take a look at those. Here we have at the top of the list things that are bad examples and good examples of unnecessary words. The product is not of a satisfactory nature. If we skip down to the good part of this slide, you can see the better way of saying that is the product is unsatisfactory. If we look again at the bad examples, the product is not of a satisfactory character. Why are we using the words character and nature? There's no need. We simply need to be able to say the product is unsatisfactory. If we look at the top again in the bad examples, after specification, we are in a position to begin detailed design. Let's look at the bottom good examples of that same sentence. After specification, we can begin detailed design. So why do we say we are in a position to? It's understood that you can do that. So that is why some words are really unnecessary. Let's look here at our fourth example. In the bad box, we say we are now in the situation of being able to begin detailed design. This is another way that could be written. If we look at the good examples, we can now begin detailed design. We don't need to say we are now in the situation of being able. We can simply say we can now begin detailed design. So here you're starting to see the way that we load our sentences with unnecessary words and using double ups on a lot of the things that we're trying to say. So in fact, we can actually cut down the length of our reports and a lot of the writing by simply coming to the main points and knowing how to eliminate the flowery, the additionals that we throw in to the way that we write something. So therefore, try not to use these sorts of abstract words that we just looked at. Try to use more concrete words. Often writers use several words for ideas that can be expressed in one. It's just a habit. Like all of these things, we fall into habits, and it's very, very difficult to break those habits. But if you really want to improve your writing and you don't want your reader or your boss or your marketing director to throw your report out the window, then you really do need to start to look at these guidelines and start to see where you're going wrong. After this session, why don't you start to read back through some of your previous reports that you've written? It could be that you have to send reports to your international colleagues, to the team leaders of your international teams, and therefore you need to be able to write very clearly. It could be indeed that you work for an organization where English is an important part of the written language or office language. So therefore, take note of these points as we do go through them. We don't want unnecessary complex sentences and redundancy of ideas, redundancy of meanings. Let's take a look at these examples to show you what redundancy means. Here we have two sentences with redundancy, meaning we are using words that are not really needed. They are redundant because we have the idea already. And below we see the sentences written without redundancy. The printer is located adjacent to the computer. Without redundancy, meaning clearer, you would say, the printer is adjacent to the computer. We don't need to add in is located, because being adjacent means that the position of the printer is near the computer. So we have here redundancy. Next up, let's look at the second example. The printer is located in the immediate vicinity of the computer. Without redundancy and better, the printer is near the computer. So here you see you have a longer sentence. It's almost double in length if you look at the space here on the slide, when you could just simply say the printer is near the computer. So bad habits, we keep them around, we hang on to them. So now is the time for you to undo those bad habits. Start to take a look at how you are writing. It is important. It is necessary to write well. Your level of professionalism will come through in the way that you write. People can be very forgiving, of course, if English is not your mother tongue. But do bear in mind, in business, if you are using English as your business language, then you do need to certainly improve it. You do need to try to make it better, to lift up its level. And so hopefully these little guidelines as we go through will help you to see those points. We are talking here about using plain English and trying not to clutter up English so it becomes so excessive and extreme in the way it comes out and the way it is written. We can also say another common cause of redundant words is when people use modifying words. For example, the word suitable in the sentence following, John left the building in suitable haste, is a modifying word. It means John left the building in suitable speed. The word suitable is redundant because the sentence, John left the building in haste, has exactly the same meaning. Suitable is not necessary. It doesn't add anything. It is redundant. We think it's a modifying word, but actually we've lapsed into a bad habit. It's not. So John left the building in haste is quite acceptable, and it has the full meaning. There's also another form of a modifying word, the one ending in y, as in suitably. And this can also be redundant in certain cases. Let's look at this example again. John was suitably impressed. This particular statement says nothing more than John was impressed. So there you have it. Why do we have to say suitably impressed? Some people say that this is adding a little bit of colour or a little bit of style of the writer to the language, and perhaps emphasis. That could be true to a point. However, we do not really need to add all these redundant words all the time. They become excessive, and we are just falling into bad habits again and again. Other examples we can look at that are examples of being redundant with the usage of our words. At the top we have the bad column, absolute nonsense. We could simply just say nonsense. Absolute is not really necessary in certain ways. Absolutely critical. We could just say critical because it's critical, it definitely is absolutely critical. So we can say critical is the appropriate word. It is enough to imply the meaning and the stress you're trying to put on things. If we look at the next example, considerable difficulty he had considerable difficulty. Well, it's good enough just to say difficulty, because difficulty in itself is considerable. And finally, we look at considerably difficult. Something was considerably difficult. We could just say it was difficult. We can also try to add degrees of difficulty, of course. I know that goes without saying, and that's probably what you like to express with your habit of using the language. However, sometimes it is not necessary. Look back, reread, and when you use the written word, you will see that perhaps you are adding words that you don't really need to. They are redundant in some ways. Moving on, we can say that one of the easiest ways to shorten and simplify your reports is to remove repetition. Apart from all the other things we've looked at, let's look now at repetition. And sometimes poorly structured reports are often characterized by the same idea being described in different places. Don't let that happen. That can really cause concern for your reader. The only real allowable repetition is in introductions and in summaries of reports. But throughout the body of the report, really do not repeat the same things, or not even exactly the same things you might imply through an idea, the same part that you mentioned on page 3 as you are now talking again about in page 6. So the way to avoid repetition is really to check through your report very thoroughly and jot down a list of the key ideas as they appear. Make a note on a piece of paper, key ideas, and make it written on the paper that it is key. So it's always refreshing your mind that this is key. These are key things that you are looking for. And where you see the same thing appear more than once, you have to decide, once and for all, the place where it should go best. Where will it be better placed? At the first place that you saw it, or at the second place where it was repeated? So then you can merge your text accordingly. Does it have more impact in the second place that you found it repeated, or in the first place when you first mentioned it? So do go through. This does happen when you're writing lengthy reports, by the way. It isn't easy, really, to put a whole lot of information down in a short space of time when you're doing a report. And therefore, you're going to make mistakes. Mistakes like repetition, for example. So don't be too hard on yourself. It could be that you're just caught up in having so much information that you're repeating every now and then. And when you can define that and see it clearly, you can begin to change that habit that you have, or that technique that you're using. So do begin to look at this. Repetition is certainly going to drive people crazy at the other end, and they'll just pick up a big red pen, go mark through the place where it's repeated. And especially if you have repeated it more than twice. So do be careful with this. This is why it's important to have someone give you feedback. If you can get feedback, then definitely this is going to eliminate those repetitious mistakes. Let's take a look now at how we use verbs and how we can use them instead of pronouns. Let's look at the following sentence. And I'll read it out loud for you. Half the team were involved in the development of System Y. So we can see this sentence contains a classic example of a common cause of poor writing style. The sentence is using an abstract noun, which is development, instead of the verb develop, from which it is derived. So it's using nouns instead of verbs, and verbs are doers. They are the actors in our sentences. Let's look at it again. The simpler and more natural way of saying this is, half the team were involved in developing System Y. That is clearer, and it's showing that the team are doing the action of developing. Sometimes we complicate things when we use these nouns or the abstract nouns. So really just cut it right down. Try to look for these points in your style. How are you using nouns? Turning verbs into abstract nouns always results in longer sentences than is necessary. So the best rule is to try not to do it. You are really lengthening your document. If you look at it over the entirety of your document, you could lengthen it dramatically purely because of the way you are writing things and using nouns instead of verbs. The following examples show improvements you can achieve by getting rid of nouns in favour of verbs. So from these examples, perhaps you can get an idea of how you can improve the way you're doing things. Here, again, is our bad column and our good column. So let's take a look in the bad column section. He used to help in the specification of new software. Let's skip down now to the good column. And a better way of saying this, he used to help specify new software. Can you see the difference? And look at the length of the sentence. When you see it displayed on the screen, you can see that it is remarkably less than the first sentence above. So take out in the specification of. Take out the development noun and use the verbal part of that, the verb form. Let's look at the next example. Acid rain accounts for the destruction of ancient stonework. That's quite a long sentence. Sounds all right to me, doesn't it? Sounds all right to you? However, if you want to shorten it, look at it this way and skip down to the good column. Acid rain destroys ancient stonework. So here you have used the verb form of the development noun, the destruction of. So we have simplified that statement and put it into a shorter format. And finally, let's look at the third example in the bad column. Here we see the analysis of the software was performed by Fred. Let's look at it in the good column. Fred analysed the software. This is a very dramatic example of how you can shorten something and have exactly the same meaning, but you've cut down on the use of using your abstract nouns. It might pay to really look at these things quite thoroughly, quite closely when you are writing. Depending on the subject matter of your particular report, you will find that you will considerably cut down the length of your report and how the language comes out in its written format. We can just simply see it here by looking at the examples up on the screen. It's very dramatic. It's very, very clear. So as we move along in our program on the actual skills you need to write well, the technical part of writing, I do hope that you begin to put them into practice along the way. The very next moment you have to write something and write it in English, then do start to take note of the things we've gone through in each of these sessions. I hope that you're able to apply them back in your workplace, and that, of course, if you do need any help along the way, don't forget to get some feedback from your colleagues or feedback from those who have a little bit more skill in terms of the English language usage. They will be able to help you, and I'm sure you'll be able to start to improve upon your technical writing skills. Thank you very much for your attention.